All right, we should have TK and Derek should be joining us any minute, but we have Daniel Krawisz, the emperor, the self-proclaimed emperor of Bitcoin, who, Daniel, I trust that you are playing Peggle at this very moment as we speak, because I hear that's kind of what you do when you come on these things.
Oh, that was just for Richard Hart, because I wanted to show my contempt for him. I don't have contempt for you guys.
Oh, that's good.
I wanted to be on your show. I thought it was really great that you got so many smart people together. So I'm glad to be on such an early episode, because that's just another way for me to be clearly ahead of the trend, because I see great things for the group that you've assembled of Numpties.
I like that word has stuck. So Daniel, when you did that interview, did you think going into it, you're going to be like, you know what, I'm going to have Peggle up on the side, and then when the time is right, I'm going to turn up my volume a little bit and let him know that I don't like him?
Well, gee, I didn't realize that it was making so much sound. I don't understand what really happened with that exactly, but because I had my headphones on, and I don't. Anyway, it was well. So I knew that it wouldn't be a productive discussion, because I knew that all of those core guys only want to humiliate people, and then they're like, I won the argument. So so what my plan was that I would just act as stupid as possible, and only someone who was a little bit smarter would realize that I was toying with him. And actually, he would look stupid if he spent the whole discussion trying to humiliate someone who was already stupid.
Yeah.
So,
I thought that was a really clever and funny moment. And actually, it looked like you got Richard to acknowledge what you were doing, and he appreciated, I think, on some level what you were doing, because he chuckled, and then he got back into character afterwards. It was like, oh, well, I could tell you about, you're addicted to games, and you should stop being addicted to games.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Are we talking about Richard Hart?
Yeah, that interview.
Yeah, because I was telling Daniel that I was assuming he was going to be playing Peggle during this call. He said no, but we just got to talking about that moment.
That is still one of my favorite interview moments of all time in any space.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, that was sort of my first moment going out in public, so I was really nervous, but I figured out my plan. And Derek, before you got on, I just said that my plan was to act stupid and say the dumbest things I could think of, and that would make Richard Hart look bad, because I knew that he would spend the whole time trying to humiliate someone who was already acting stupid.
Yep.
So
yeah,
it's
he
like,
didn't get it.
and only the most intelligent people watching would actually realize what was going on. And so I knew it wouldn't be a productive discussion. So I just tried to make it into something that would attract the most intelligent people and would filter out the rest. So that was very good. It worked out perfectly. And yeah, a lot of people have told me that they first learned about me from that interview, and they thought Richard Hart was funny and amusing, but they're kind of people who who just think he's like a funny person, and so then they also thought I was a funny character when they saw me on his show.
So Daniel, I want to dive into a discussion with you, and I know we all have a lot of questions, but before we do that, quickly, since now we have the four Numpties, the four Numpties of the apocalypse, the Numpty bunch, whatever we're going to be called. Everybody's here. Real quick, a whole lot has happened since the last time we talked, guys. It was 2 weeks ago. So I just thought we'd do a really quick, everybody, if there's one or two things that you think are interesting, worth noting that happened since we last recorded. I'll start. I just had 3 funny things. One, I thought it was funny. I pissed off, I think it was one of the Twitch founders, but I was just mentioning like a plugin for Slack or something. And anyway, it was very offensive to a lot of people on Twitch that I suggested some people like Slack and micropayments aren't necessarily the best payment method for every single business model. That was kind of fun. And then I managed to piss off a whole bunch of Bitcoin BTC people by just posting a link to a transaction that cost $1,000. And apparently that is dishonest to do that, to show the Block Explorer exactly what's happening on chain. That was funny. But my favorite thing, my absolute favorite thing, you guys already know what I'm going to say, that happened in the last couple of weeks. Billionaire Playboy BSV investor Calvin Ayre shared our videos and called us either moronic children or
That's
childish morons. I can't remember which one. And he requested that we act more dignified. So Calvin, if you're watching, I just want you to know the request has been filed in a special drawer where I keep such requests. We will consider whether or not we want to act more dignified.
Okay,
consensus.
now come on. That sounds like a joke to me, because Calvin Ayre doesn't act dignified.
he said I think somebody like defended us, and he said if they act more dignified, then I will treat them with more dignity or something like. But he deleted the tweet later.
Oh, whatever.
So it was great. It's been captured. So that was my favorite thing that happened.
Calvin posts all of these pictures about him on his yacht with like with young women who are half his age, and
I think we don't have enough twerking for his style.
Right.
Let's keep it that way.
I want my lawyers on this episode.
To twerk?
No. Well, no, not that.
I love that there was a pause. Okay. Well.
I mean, what else happened, guys? What's the current event?
Calvin's a big fan of the show. I think the whole tweet was just signaling that he actually enjoys the show, and we enjoy him. Calvin took me to CoinGeek twice now, so he's been super generous to me. So thank you, Calvin.
Hey, we'll come to CoinGeek again if somebody wants to, offer.
Yeah.
I love how Steve commented on the post, and Steve goes, "Hey, I love to come to CoinGeek if you pay our, like fly me out there." And then some guy responds to Steve like, "Hey, quit begging," and he just gives Steve a lecture.
He said it's unbecoming when a man asks another man for alms or something.
Yeah. And I was thinking, somebody's never been invited to a conference before, obviously. I didn't say that, but yeah. And then he deleted it. I had some witty retort to him, and then he deleted the comment, and I was like, oh man, you chickened out. Come on.
No, and it made you look silly because on the comment it was
it made it seem like I was like actually begging or something.
Oh, go ahead, TK.
I just love the power move. I love the power move. I love the way Calvin just took control of the entire frame by letting us know that he is now the standard for what it means to act dignified. And even though we've received no instructions on what was childish about us, now we have to play his game of trying to figure out how we need to act, and he'll let us know if we're being dignified. It reminds me of when I was a kid. My older brother would always do these things where he'd tell everyone else, like, if you earn an opportunity to compete with me, I'll let you play me in the video game. It'll be like the championship match. and he never defined what it meant to earn it. And he just make you do a bunch of stuff. And he'd be like, nah, I don't think that earns a championship match. And he would just pull the strings. I think that's what Calvin's doing.
Well, next episode we'll have some babes on. And we'll see if that's a good step in the right direction.
No promises. Oh, there was one other thing that happened the last couple of weeks that I thought was hilarious. Somebody shared a video that, professes or shares the theory that Adam Back is Satoshi. And the video is actually really interesting. It has a couple of interesting things that I don't think I'd seen before. And it makes an interesting argument. But the funniest thing is that immediately when it came out, Adam Back goes on to Twitter to be like, hey guys, have you seen that video that claims I'm Satoshi? It's really, really compelling, but it's not true. And then everybody's like, yeah, we believe you, Adam. And he's like, no, I don't think
you don't understand.
I don't think you understand how compelling it is. You would not be crazy to think it was true, but it's not. Yeah, okay, Adam, we believe you. No. You would be an idiot to not assume I'm Satoshi based on how similar we are. It's almost unbelievable, even though it's not true. Like, the dude really wants you to think he's Satoshi.
At one point he was like, it really goes a lot deeper than that. And then he goes into like explaining a bunch of information that the video didn't even mention. He's like, I really could be Satoshi. But don't bother looking it up because I'm not.
It's like that time my friend Paige was in this TV show and he's playing a character that's sick. And so I'm sitting next to him as we're watching him on TV and he goes, hey, dog, you don't know how dope my acting really was. He goes, I was sick on that day as a person. And he says, I was sick playing an actor who wasn't really sick, doing a character that was sick. He's like, so the way that my character was sick is different from how I was sick as a person. It's like 3 levels of sickness. That's what Adam Back is doing. He's like, I'm not really Satoshi, but man, if you really understood the stuff you don't understand, you really think I was Satoshi.
Oh, so let's jump right in with Daniel. We got a lot of stuff we want to get into, but I just want to start because I don't think I've ever heard you share, or I've never seen, 2 questions. How did you first get into Bitcoin? And then what was your process of, like, when did you realize that big blocks were the way to go?
Oh, well, I'll take the second question first. And I mean, I always thought that a limited block size was nonsense. And there's a tweet from 2014 that's on my profile right now because somebody retweeted it where I'm saying,
did, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thanks. Yeah, and so it was always my understanding that Bitcoin would scale with bigger blocks, and it was also always my understanding that bigger blocks is the only thing that would work. And this is based on an article by Oleg Andreev that I like called Proof of Work is the Only Solution to the Byzantine Generals Problem. And so when we have a solution to the Byzantine Generals Problem, then what we get is capitalism, because everybody can act independently, and yet their actions will all be harmonious with one another. And that's kind of what the Byzantine Generals Problem means, is that the system as a whole is able to survive even with many independent actors. And proof of work means we use big blocks. Using some kind of alternate system that's not based on proof of work means that people are going to interfere with one another. So first question is, I was actually introduced to Bitcoin by Ross Ulbricht when he was inventing the Silk Road. And I was at an event called 3-Day Startup, where a bunch of young people were being introduced to startup culture. They were being inducted into startup culture, I should say. And the idea is we were all going to try to figure out startups to start over the weekend and just throw together a bunch of business ideas. And so Ross Ulbricht was there, and his business idea that he presented was the Silk Road, but he didn't tell people that it was going to be an illegal drug market. He said that it was just going to be a market with Bitcoin and with where the business was being an escrow service. And he told me a little bit about Bitcoin, but he wasn't able to answer my economic questions about it. So, so I thought that the idea wasn't going to work. And the reason was, at the time, Bitcoin didn't have a market and it didn't have a price. And so based on my understanding of Austrian economics, I said that it wouldn't be able to become money because, according to the regression theorem in Austrian economics, a good that is going to become money must initially have a value that makes people want to acquire it before it can be used as money at all. And to me, it appeared that Bitcoin did not have that. So I said it wasn't going to work. And then later, I noticed, but I kept an eye on Bitcoin just in case. And later, I noticed that it did have a price. So I didn't quite understand how that had happened. But to me, that meant that my objection to Bitcoin had been met. So I realized that I needed to take a closer look. And this was during the 2011 mania. And my thinking was, well, so in Man, Economy, and State, Rothbard says that a new money cannot take over and displace an established form of money. And to me, it looked like Bitcoin was not doing what Rothbard said. To me, it looked like Bitcoin was growing. And so what I thought was that as the Bitcoin economy grows, Bitcoin becomes better money. So if it can compete with the dollar when it's a tiny economy, it competes even better when it's a big economy. So I decided I had better get some immediately because it's only going to become more competitive as time goes on. And I think that Bitcoin in general massively increases the value of understanding the economy, and because of the speed at which information travels, Bitcoin increases the speed at which information travels. So it increases the degree to which people can benefit by being ahead of each other. So time is compressed in Bitcoin, and this is something that I understood early on because I was aware of the role of time in Austrian economics.
Why is time compressed in Bitcoin?
Because of the fixed supply. Because there's a greater benefit to savings in Bitcoin, and because there's this need for miners to retrieve the latest block as fast as possible, there's this corresponding it ensures that information travels quickly. So any information that's relevant to price needs to move around really fast because everybody wants to know the latest information quickly, because Bitcoin reacts so strongly to this information. So people...
Can I jump on in here?
Yeah.
I know this is a bit going back to something you said earlier about the regression theorem. I just want to hit on again as an economic point. I want to make a sociological point and then an economic point. So it's interesting you say that you had this early skepticism because of the regression theorem. I remember way back in the early days before I paid too much attention. This was probably like 2011 or so. There was a big group of people who considered themselves partial to the Austrian School of Economics, who were making the argument that Bitcoin couldn't be money because of the regression theorem. This was even after it had already established a market price.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally ridiculous. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I remember that happening. And if Bitcoin already has a price, then it can become money.
Exactly. So the regression theorem was distorted to become a litmus test to say, can this be money? Well, if it theoretically might violate the regression theorem, it means it can't be money, even if it already has a price. But
it's like the economists arguing that lighthouses can't be provided privately because they can't think of a way that it could be. And outside their window, there's literally a privately provided. I remember Jeff Tucker and I had a debate about this with some other guys, that Jeff was trying to prove that it satisfied the theorem. And I'm like, but it has a price. It already has a price.
Well, so
yeah, I mean, if you think that, I mean, if you have this problem with the regression theorem, you're just a dogmatist and you don't know how to think like a scientist at all.
Well, so let me ask you on that point. So I remember having some of these debates with people, even though I wasn't like sold on Bitcoin, I was thinking, I don't think this is a correct application of the regression theorem. Couldn't it be that the simplest resolution to the regression theorem is that Bitcoin or any other good really could gain value by being a collectible? I mean, the most trivial thing. It seems to me that the regression theorem is like a description of how monies might emerge rather than a litmus test of whether or not they could emerge.
Right. And so my thinking was, when I saw that Bitcoin had developed a price, my conclusion was that I had failed to understand the initial reason to acquire Bitcoin. So I didn't think that the regression theorem was wrong. What I thought was that I had failed to apply it correctly in the real world. So if Bitcoin had a price, then there must have been some initial reason to acquire it, and I just didn't know what it was. So I tried to learn as much about how Bitcoin worked as possible, starting from that point. And so now I have an answer for Bitcoin's initial value. And what I think it is has to do with proof of work. And so there's a very important book called The Handicap Principle by Zahavi, which is, and the ideas in this book are not understood by Austrian economists currently, but they need to understand.
I got to throw in a quick caveat to that, because they are understood very well by a particular kind of neo-Austrian school out of George Mason University. I would point to Peter Leeson's work in particular. He's a big Misesian, but he's done a lot of work on signaling theory in a lot of applications that fulfills, I think, many of the handicap principles criteria. And I read that book about a year and a half ago because I heard you mention it, by the way, and it was well worth it.
Okay, well, anyway, the handicap principle needs to be incorporated into the broader Austrian theory. And this idea explains Bitcoin's initial value. So what the handicap principle was originally proposed by a biologist to explain animal communication, especially in sexual selection. At least that's the most obvious application, but it really has applications for all kinds of different things. So it has applications for like predator-prey communication in both directions. And it has applications for, well, anyway, let me explain how it works. What the principle says is that the only reliable signal that can be transmitted over an adversarial connection, in other words, one in which the signaler can potentially benefit from deception, is one that demonstrates opportunity cost. So you need a signal that the recipient can easily verify to have been costly to produce. So that's kind of why I talk about antlers a lot, and I talk about the peacock's tail, because those are both applications. So, and of course, there's many animals that have impressive signals to one another. Well, so the reason it works is that if the signal is costly, then you can't use it very much. You can't. There's a limit to how much you can use the signal, and you have to limit your use of the signal to cases where it's actually likely to be where it's likely that the receiver is going to accept your offer or is going to want what you're offering. So the signaler has to figure out what other animals are actually interested in. They have to limit the use of the signal to other animals that actually would be interested. So the recipients of the signal can treat it like it's honest. On average, it's not honest 100, perfectly, but on average, the value of on average, the recipient will gain by paying more attention to messages that demonstrate more opportunity cost. And in Bitcoin, we have hash power. And hash power is a costly signal because you can verify cryptographically that energy was spent. So energy, so I think that proof of work is like antlers for ideas. And you can use...
What were those earliest Bitcoiners trying to signal by expending that energy? And
well,
to whom?
the first Bitcoiner was signaling that he was spending energy to acquire Bitcoins. And we don't know why he was doing that just from looking at the blockchain itself. But what we do know is that if we had Bitcoins and we offered him a better rate, we could get him to do work for us. So, because we know he's spending energy to get the initial Bitcoins. So if we acquire some, we can pay him and offer him something better than what he's already getting, and then we can get him to do something for us.
So the visibility of the cost, the opportunity cost, creates a market because now you have a price that you can underbid, and you know that that he values it to that extent.
Right.
So just on that point, that is one explanation perhaps for how there's an answer to the regression theorem, but couldn't there just be a simpler one? Well, couldn't there be one of two, actually? One is that Bitcoin might have gained its initial value because people viewed it as a collectible. They just think, hey, this is a novelty item. I like having this novelty item that initially gives it price, and therefore regression theorem satisfied. And the other would be even like a recursive, where people think to themselves, well, this might be used as future money just because it's the first thing that seems to be created by the marketplace to be money because it's got all these other properties. So maybe the mere expectation that other people might value it as money could be sufficient to give it an initial value.
Well, I disagree with those, or I should say neither of those work without the handicap theory. And it's hash power that causes people to act together. So if we're just talking about a digital good that doesn't have hash power, there isn't a reason for people to be coordinated as they acquire this initial good. So I think that there isn't a very good reason for people to believe that other people are acquiring this good as they're acquiring it.
Now that would explain how Bitcoin might have a low market value, but you could imagine that even among a small group of individuals who view it just purely as a collectible, as a novelty item, and they want to own it, that they amongst themselves could value it to give it and trade it amongst themselves at a penny a unit.
Yeah, but then they have to know each other in order to know that they value it. So Bitcoin, we can have that without people knowing each other.
So I think if I'm hearing correctly, because it's a digital good, if I just made up, whatever, Isaac Bucks, and you could just type in a string of characters as an Isaac Buck or whatever, even if you wanted those, the fact that they're essentially costless to reproduce means that there's no urgency, there's no need to go obtain them. But the fact that you've created scarcity around a digital good by making it costly to create, to mine, now that means it's costly to obtain, and that it has this fixed limit. You need that element of it. That's why other digital goods don't have because they lack the scarcity.
But it wasn't really expensive, and it was like running your laptop essentially for free. You could create a lot of these coins at the beginning. It's not like you were signaling you were putting a huge investment in.
But you don't need that others can't create them beyond the 21 million limit. That there is an ultimate cap, and that it gets costlier over time. But
that's not a necessity to value a digital good. Right?
No, but
so
I
it's
think
like you can still have value that's being traded to acquire a collectible, even if it can be printed up arbitrarily. And we're just trusting Isaac that he doesn't print up more Isaac bucks.
Well, like if there's an infinite supply and you can create them yourself for almost no cost indefinitely, then there's not really a market.
Well, but what I'm saying is the regression theorem, I think really does get extended way farther beyond its ability here, because the only thing we're trying to do is trying to explain how is it that any Bitcoins got any value in the market whatsoever.
Why did the first person pay any amount of money to obtain a Bitcoin?
It might have been 5 people that were in some club that found this collectible. Even if the properties of the good aren't desirable, you can still have an initial value. And then once it has any initial value, even if it's traded among 5 people, suddenly now you could have a larger market develop if it's got better properties and more people are going to desire it.
Yeah.
I agree. Sustained.
Next topic.
Okay, so you kind of, from a very economic analysis vantage point, kind of figured out that there's something here. And once you were satisfied that there's actually a real market for it, you got in. Now, when you were working with, because it seems like the idea of scaling with larger blocks was just totally natural to you, but you work kind of closely with, if I recall, some of the guys who are like hardcore small block guys now, like Maxis or whatever, from the Nakamoto Institute. When was the point where like a lot of your friends in Bitcoin started to change their mind about block size, or did they always think small blocks and you just assumed that they thought the same thing you did? Like, what happened there?
Well, they're narcissists and they can be manipulated by popularity. Before we started the Nakamoto Institute, we had an economics discussion group at UT where we talked about the classics of Austrian economics, and we went through all of the Austrian economics material. And when we had that, we had reasonable discussions where people would, make arguments about things and, think about what other people said, and excuse me, and usually people would I would say usually people listen to me a lot because I had the best arguments. And when my former friends from the Nakamoto Institute became popular, they stopped listening to anything that I said, and they became tools of the BTC consensus. So they they only wanted to go along with the core developers, and they wanted to treat them like they were superior, which is something that I never believed, because to me, Bitcoin is about economics, and somebody who understands economics knows more about Bitcoin than someone who can program. And and they used things that I had written to support their narrative, but were not interested in listening to me explain how they were misinterpreting them. So, for example, one thing that I try to teach people early on in Bitcoin is that savings is the primary function of money. So people use this to support the idea that Bitcoin doesn't need payments, which, I mean, that's so
No, you see,
idiotic.
Daniel, you save it so that you cannot be able to use it in the future. See, that's how savings
okay,
works.
wait, now saving is using. So when you earn Bitcoin, that's when you start using it. And when you spend Bitcoin, that's when you're done using it. Spending isn't using, holding is using.
I like that.
But if you can't spend, then there's no point in holding. Like the point, the value of savings is, well, people say like money for a rainy day. Well, what does that mean? That means that when new information comes in, when something happens, you're ready to move. But if you can't spend it, then you're not ready to move. And we're sort of seeing that now. The mempool has been getting worse and worse the last few days. And so if you have BTC and you receive new information, that BTC does not make you any better off right now, because you can't act quickly with it.
You know, that's one thing that is dramatically underappreciated, I think, by holders, is like, even if you promised me, hey, here's a place you can put money, you can use money, and it's going to give you a 10% annual return, a 30% annual return. But even if you could guarantee me that return, but when you decide you want to spend it, you may or may not be able to access it in 1 minute, 1 day, 1 week, and it may or may not cost you $1, $1,000. The uncertainty about the access to those funds is like a humongous component. Even if it's earning great return, if I don't know how quickly I can use it, it dramatically reduces the value.
Yeah. I mean, the value of savings is you're first in line. That money is the most liquid good. That means when you have it, you're first in line to do whatever you want. And that's not how BTC works.
Yeah, it turns the liquid into a solid.
It felt like,
Right.
But then you use the liquid network on top of the solid.
Exactly.
It felt like at the time that you were responding to, because a lot of your articles do talk about hoarding Bitcoin, but it felt like at the time you were responding to the other fallacy, which is that spending will stimulate the Bitcoin economy or something like that.
Right, exactly.
And that was a common thing
at
the time in particular.
Yeah.
Like, let's support Bitcoin businesses by spending our Bitcoin.
Yeah,
but that doesn't.
Which is bullshit.
It's also a terrible signal, right?
Well,
because you're signaling to the market, I want to dispose of this money. Right?
I completely disagree with that idea. I think that's incorrect. I think especially when you're bootstrapping a new money, that can be, if the idea is saving for future spending, you have to demonstrate to businesses and to other individuals and participants in the market that that good is acceptable, that you can receive it for payment. If there's nobody that will accept it, then it's not going to be something you want to spend in.
It's not about accepting it. It's about inducing people to spend it. So if Bitcoin is better money, you have to work harder in order to earn it. That's all there is to it. So a Bitcoin business must provide better than a fiat business.
Yeah, they have to work harder to convince you to part with your money. That's just a fact of reality, given that we have a better money.
Why would there be a separation between Bitcoin businesses and other businesses? If you want it to be used as money, it has to be used in.
No, because a business that's entering the market early and trying to convince you to give them your Bitcoin, if you think your Bitcoin is going to be more valuable in the future, they have to work harder to get your Bitcoin than they do to get your fiat.
The separation is what kind of money do you want to earn? If you're indifferent between Bitcoin and fiat, you don't understand it.
Well, however, I think this way of thinking implies that Bitcoin has already demonstrated that it is superior money in a market. If you're talking about a time where not a lot of people are accepting it in commerce, not a lot of people are saving in it, then it seems to me quite obvious that you need to push merchant adoption. You need to push rewarding the companies that are accepting it with a good user experience and say, hey, this actually works. Maybe I should use this as payments more often.
I mean, if they're providing a better business model, otherwise you're rewarding inefficient companies. You know, like if a company, they have to provide a better service. If they're not providing a better service, you're actually exchanging to them. You're giving them money for a less efficient service so that you can have less money later on. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, capital markets are a future prediction contest, and a business that doesn't want to work harder to earn Bitcoins isn't trying to win the future prediction contest.
What do you mean they're not trying? They're not Bitcoin-only businesses. They're regular businesses that are accepting a new payment mechanism because their customers are demanding it, they're curious about it. And in the process, it makes the value of that currency that much more valuable because it's demonstrated that it's more useful. You can actually get rid of it.
What makes Bitcoin more valuable in terms of price is more people who want to save in Bitcoin. And a way of acquiring Bitcoin is running a business.
But the reason that you save in Bitcoin is because you think you can eventually spend Bitcoin.
Yeah, in the future. But the reason someone would want to accept Bitcoin as a payment option is because people want to save it.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, but nobody look. If Bitcoin was a technology that was invented, and it gained no merchant adoption, regular people are not going to want to acquire this thing to save in if they can never spend it. So for some period of time, you have to...
Remember, savings is the primary function of money. So what people will do is they'll save in Bitcoin, and if there aren't businesses that are accepting it, they'll just start providing services to one another for Bitcoin. So it's the desire to save that makes people want to earn, and people who don't want to earn Bitcoins don't know what they should be saving in.
I don't think that's correct at all. I think that might be true for a very small amount of people that think to themselves, here's this thing that was created, I'm going to put my money in it and save it, even though it's not, I can't actually use it as a currency.
I mean, it's kind of like
saving is using. You're using it as a currency if you're saving.
But the function of saving is holding it for when you
future
can,
exchange.
For future exchange.
And there has to be a point at which you can exchange it in the future.
You know that there are other savings. You know that there are other savers because of hash power. So you can find them, and then they will want to accept Bitcoin.
Yeah, but you're talking about a tiny little group.
Well, it depends on what the extent of that market is, but you just need to know that there is a market for it. So like if you have a bunch of, whatever, vintage Michael Jordan sneakers, you will want to save those, or many people do, not because they think that Walmart will accept them in 5 years in exchange for, a ladder or a sandwich, but because they know there is someone who will accept them in exchange for something else that they value, because there is a market, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a market for the specific consumer good that you need, but you need a market. And the question is, I think that you guys are getting at, what is the extent of that market necessary to achieve a scale beyond a collector's item, beyond the market for vintage sneakers.
So I think the point about, you know, merchants and stuff is refuted by the fact that there haven't really been a whole lot of successful Bitcoin businesses that are just accepting Bitcoin as the primary form of payment and being profitable.
Why would they need to accept it as a primary form of payment? It's just
Well,
another form of payment that's easier than credit cards for certain use cases.
Well, but
yeah,
only, only if it actually is
if it's
easier.
actually easier
Right.
and actually a better form for that use case.
Because otherwise Gresham's law kicks in. And why would you, if you can pay with either form of money, you're going to pay with the one that you value less for saving. And that's going to be dollars. So unless the business itself, if paying with Bitcoin gets you something you can only get by paying with Bitcoin, a novel use case, a lower fee, or some other form of value add, there's no real reason to do it.
So before the blocks became full, Bitcoin was having success. I mean, BitPay processed like $1 billion worth of transactions, or maybe even more, before the
weren't most of those like remittances and stuff like that incorporated?
That was a use case that you can't do.
That wasn't like small merchant payments, was it?
No, I don't think it was
like Shopify stores.
Yeah, that was mainstream merchants getting paid by regular customers in Bitcoin. I don't think they did merchant.
I've never seen any evidence of that.
You got to look at the statistics that BitPay was putting.
I remember looking. It seemed like it was mostly like cross-border like remittances. And stuff.
Like BitPay's revenue as of like a year ago was like almost exclusively from helping companies do international money.
Now after the blocks became full, they even lost customers. Not only was a huge hit for the whole Bitcoin economy, but they actually lost.
Yeah, but I don't know how that's even relevant to what we're talking about.
They've had 3 years to get him back with big blocks.
I think Krawisz is pulled up his video game. I think we lost him. He's gone.
He's peggling again. We got him to peggle.
No, I'm not. But no, if somebody's going to give me a Bitcoin discount, then if somebody says we take dollars or Bitcoins, I'll pay with dollars. That's
I understand that. What I'm saying is, if it's the case that everybody is doing that, you are not going to be able to eventually spend your Bitcoin. In order to justifiably think to yourself, oh, I'm going to save my money in this, you have to think that at a future time you can spend it. And if
you
the
just
only
need to know
people
that somebody else is willing to buy it, there just needs to be a predictive market price.
Why would we think that? I mean, even if it's the case that there's 15 people who are Bitcoin enthusiasts, it's like, oh, well, I know I can eventually cash out to those 15 people who are Bitcoin enthusiasts. Why would we think that would make a superior money to one where not only can you save in it, but you also can go around and spend it all the time, and you have confidence that in the future you're not going to be selling to 15 enthusiasts?
It's a comparative level of confidence. Like, you never have absolute confidence that the US dollar will be accepted or at any given exchange rate by everybody, but you have a high degree of confidence.
You can judge more people.
High degree of confidence that Bitcoin will be accepted at a future date for the same or more, but it's a relative guess. It's a bet on what people will value in the future. And as long as there's enough of a market, that's,
it's the thing is, it's your responsibility to think ahead. It's your responsibility to imagine the future state, and that's how that's how capital markets work.
So do you imagine in a future state
wait,
you'll be able?
Okay.
He's going to start peggling if you don't let him finish, Dan.
Well, if somebody doesn't understand that a fixed supply money is better for savings, and they don't predict that future, and they just say, I'm indifferent to which form of money that I'm going to accept, they're not predicting the future. So the people that I like are the ones who are predicting the future. Those are the ones who make the future happen. Those are the people that I'm interested in.
In your future prediction, do you imagine regular acceptance of Bitcoin in everyday commercial transactions?
Yeah.
Okay, so why? I mean, do you think that's a necessary part of?
Yeah, right.
Okay,
But
so I'm missing something.
The reason that people want to earn Bitcoins is because they want to save in Bitcoins. So
Okay,
if you don't,
but the
if you
reason
don't
they
want
want to save in Bitcoins is because they think they'll be able to spend them in the future, which we've established is,
But if
so we have to go
But
from a
merchant
state of,
adoption is not the only.
If you don't think that Bitcoin is going to be spendable in the future, then I'm not going to give you any now.
Okay, I understand that, but there's only one way to go from a state of not having general acceptance as a medium of exchange and having general acceptance, and that's through the important and necessary process of gaining merchant acceptance. In fact, that is a necessary.
Why is that the only way?
That's not true at all.
No.
What?
No.
Why is that the only way?
It's literally
Merchants-
necessary.
You are so wrong, Steve.
That might be the
Merchant,
final.
no.
That might be the final outcome, the final result of a series of other
Okay,
things.
okay, but the only way to get there is by going through a necessary, discrete, step-by-step process of more people, which should be celebrated, which is a good thing.
People
Well,
will do that on their own. Okay.
Yeah.
Once they figure out that Bitcoin is better for savings, then they're going to want to start.
And what a better way to demonstrate to people that Bitcoin is better for savings than to say you can save in it, and you look out in the world and it is accepted by all of these places. It gains a massive amount of legitimacy, which is important. Yeah.
Bitcoin never needs to have legitimacy. That's
What do you mean it doesn't need to have legitimacy? Of course, it needs to be money.
Have you read Ayn Rand?
Yeah.
Okay, so Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, not the entirety of her work, but yes.
Well, yeah, no. Have you
You
read?
sell out.
I know.
The way that things work in Ayn Rand novels is the main character spends the entire novel with everybody shitting on him and saying that nothing he's doing is ever going to work and nobody believes in anything. And then finally at the end, everybody realizes that everything they've been doing has been stupid except him. And then they have no choice but to go along with his plan. That's how it works in Bitcoin. And so we start out with the highest IQ people saving in Bitcoin. And that makes the dollar economy slightly worse relative to the Bitcoin economy because they're losing all of their atlases, right? Then the next level of IQ realizes who they need to be allied with. So they join in with the top IQ people. Then we just go through that process again and again until finally all the lowest IQ people join the Bitcoin economy too.
Yeah, I think that's completely wrong. I think IQ is greatly overrated. And I think, in fact, having a high IQ oftentimes disposes people to be kind of retarded.
A little bit, Steve. That's not really the point.
No.
I don't think Daniel literally means IQ.
I'm not literally.
Of course.
People who can best predict the future.
Economic foresight.
No. Okay. There's a huge difference between people who are who are the most competent actors in the marketplace and those individuals who are currently or presently valuing Bitcoin as a potential savings mechanism. It's like there is a enormous difference between thinking that Bitcoin might be a good money and actually being like a competent atlas in the marketplace. And in fact,
I disagree with that. I think that the people who think that Bitcoin is good money are the atlases. They're the ones who understand the most important thing in the market.
I understand that you believe that. I believe that you believe that. However, I have seen plenty of people who otherwise have had financial success, who probably have high IQs, who are heavily invested in BTC because they think that's going to be the project that is going to gain widespread adoption in the future. And they're completely...
But that's what's great about Bitcoin is there's a whole new IQ level that you have to pass now.
Steve, I think Daniel's actually before. I think Daniel's actually agreeing with your point that this is sort of the humility that Hayek talks about that you have to have in the market, that it's hard for people to accept that those who are really good at predicting certain things in the market may be idiots in a lot of other ways and vice versa. And so here's this new thing. Just because you are really phenomenal at building businesses on the internet or whatever, doesn't mean you are the most correct about this particular thing. And you may be an idiot in other ways and actually be the most correct about this. And it may even be for the wrong reasons, but like it's a specialized type of being correct.
So here's what I've seen. It is the case that the writing was on the wall for BTC for a long time. For various reasons, it seemed pretty clear. The market has, at least in the short run, decided that BTC has a much greater value than the combined potential value of BSV and BCH, of big block Bitcoin.
Every time you say the word BTC, Daniel just cracks up.
No, I just think it's so funny that many people think that BTC is good.
No, I know it is.
What is wrong with them?
Oh my gosh,
Anyway,
that was.
Hey, we shouldn't debate that.
I
want to move on to like other
Wait,
questions.
no.
Okay,
Hey,
let Steve
I gotta
finish,
finish.
and then TK needs to
Okay.
talk.
It seems completely reasonable to me to believe that in the future there will be a small group of highly intelligent, correct theorists who understand that big block Bitcoin could be a superior form of money, and it never gains any real world traction because that group of people who understands it is extraordinarily small, and it requires collaborating with the rest of the marketplace in order to make a successful money. And we have concrete real world experience of superior technology based on superior economics, superior incentives failing because the masses are the people that you need, and they are in fact that stupid. And it's not just the masses. I mean, there are otherwise intelligent people in crypto projects that are having more success than the minority of big block Bitcoin. And I see no reason to believe that is somehow a guarantee that the people...
Success is not guaranteed, okay? That I believe in success, but you're right, success is not guaranteed. But I disagree that we need the masses, okay? The masses need us. That's how it really works.
I love that.
Yeah, well, okay, that might be true, but I don't think that the way you get the masses is by buying the coin and then holding on to it. Like, I think the way actually
No, you're right. No, you need to do a lot more than that to make Bitcoin successful.
Okay, well, I agree, but I guess what I would say that what you need to do and what a money needs to do is gain more mainstream adoption and traction so that the masses are coming along. I don't think sitting and saying, we have the best money is the way that is not a good method for actually winning.
Cash widget on your site does almost nothing for adoption. I mean, that's why we've already been through this. We have Bitcoin Cash.
Wait, hang on. Daniel can vouch for me. Okay, Daniel was in this for a long time. Daniel's
like
seen
the
a lot.
Bumper
Okay.
sticker.
I've seen all this too.
Daniel, no. You remember, Daniel, when there was no merchant acceptance?
They're trying to out OG us, Derek.
Do you think? Yeah, that's right. You guys just listen. No, you remember when there was no merchant acceptance? Would you say that the pitch or the success of Bitcoin as a superior form of money improved when there was mainstream adoption, when Microsoft came on board, when it was like, hey, you can actually spend this in places, books were written, there were articles, it was on the mainstream news? Do you think that made Bitcoin better money?
Yeah, and it was a horrible thing for Bitcoin when fees went up and all of those businesses left. But the way that Bitcoin succeeds is Bitcoiners need to serve each other. So people who believe in saving in Bitcoin need to provide services for other people who have Bitcoin. And that will result in specialization, because people need to figure out what they're best at. What is their optimal service that they can provide to other Bitcoiners. That's what makes people want to join, is that there's a good economy in Bitcoin. So the way I see us achieving success is by being better at serving each other than dollar profit seekers are at serving people with dollars.
I think that is not a strategy for success. I think the other approach of trying to blur the lines between fiat and crypto, and by using it in commerce, I think that's definitely the way to go, because I lived through it, and it was a completely different conversation when you're talking about Bitcoin prior to any acceptance versus once it gained legitimacy, which I think is a critical feature.
I'm with
of
Daniel here as a strategic point, and maybe this just appeals to, you know, what I've come to in life in general with philosophy and business as well. But the idea of, let's go out and tell people to change their behavior because it's some kind of cause. We're on some kind of mission, and we need like bumper stickers, and we need persuasion campaigns to try to convince them to change their behavior in this manner and join us. That evangelistic approach, it's the Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on doors. You know, have you heard of Bitcoin? Will you please accept Bitcoin, please? I think that is so inferior to find your niche market who knows what's going on. You get together and you say, look, we know that. I mean, this is how we built Praxis.
But
we didn't go
that
trying to
worked.
convince people. We didn't go trying to convince people who were happy with college that they should not go to college and do Praxis. We went and found people who already agreed with us and said, hey, you're right. We already got something. Let's make it better. And all of a sudden, you get it growing, and all these people over here, right? This is crossing the chasm. This is like classic early adopter to late stage adopter. These people over here say, what are they doing over there? They kind of have their own thing going, and they seem to all really like it. And it's like slowly growing. And now I don't care about their cause or their ideology or anything else. I'm just curious. And it's like an actual real thing. Maybe I want to join now. But you get that by serving, as Daniel says, serving each other, other people who value Bitcoin. You serve your early customers who already agree with you on the problem, and they're already looking for your solution, and you don't go try to evangelize other people. That's how you build a great product that other people eventually want to come join.
But that last part was the most important part. The other people, when they are ready, and you already have the basics built, like we already saw in Bitcoin.
You start with who you have product market fit for. There's no product market fit for those other people.
But how did we get from Bitcoin BTC to be from almost worthless to over $20,000?
Because
by
there was
tricking people.
Well, I mean, that's partly true. But the only reason that's true, though, is because the underlying technology broke. If BTC was a big block Bitcoin, it wouldn't have been a trick.
Right.
Right. Okay. So somehow the process that a success looks like is you might start with the core. You start with the people you're serving. People, you got this great technology, and then because the place you have to end up in order to succeed is reaching the mass market. At some point, you got to celebrate and encourage and grow that mass market adoption.
I don't even think you need to sell them. They'll come to you when you have
right.
something too good to ignore. If you go out trying to convince them and they pop in and it's at all not great, then they'll never want to come back again. They'll come to you when your shit is too good to ignore.
Right.
Steve, I mean, Bitcoin Cash has merchant adoption, you know, I mean, like it's pretty trivial now to add Bitcoin Cash.
From what I heard, all of Australia is on Bitcoin Cash.
You can literally add any e-commerce store with Bitcoin very easily, and a lot of stores now take it.
Well,
and they take a whole basket of cryptocurrencies.
It shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So this is the thing. There doesn't need to be any disharmony between the saving and the spending. I'm just saying that the whole point of the saving is the future spending, and so we should encourage both saving and spending.
All right, so here we go.
Well,
I'm going to sell this.
I'm not going to. No, I mean, I'm going to encourage spending by trying to earn more. So I will encourage spending among people who want to pay me for what I'm offering. That's the only way that I'm going to encourage spending.
But that's so small scale. That's
that's what everyone should do. That's the correct.
Steve, you're just outnumbered here.
We're going to settle this. We're going to put the money where the mouth is. Here's what we're going to do. 6-month experiment. No, we'll call it an 18-month because you always got to say 18 months. Okay. Steve, You are going to buy a stack of 10,000 bumper stickers that say Bitcoin accepted.
I'm not making
and
bumper
no,
sticker.
Just listen. And
All
you
right,
are
all
going
right.
to go out and you are going to convince as many merchants as possible. You are going to pay them and beg them to put those stickers up and accept it. Daniel is going to build Boost Proof of Work, which I hope we'll talk about, over the next 18 months to try to serve people who are already interested in Bitcoin. At the end of 18 months, we will see who has been most successful based on whatever criteria I decide. TK, you had a question.
I would short my position on that.
Because there's so many questions to ask. And
Yeah, Steve,
TK,
have you
need to
earned
speak, man.
have you earned the right to compete with Isaac?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, good.
You clearly haven't earned the right.
Yeah.
Clearly no. The answer is no.
No, but what I was going to say is I got to hear more Krawisz, man. We only have a little bit more time left, and I got to hear more of this brother. I truly think he's one of the most interesting, eccentric figures of our time, and he needs to be talking a lot more. I have so many questions, and I know we all do. I'm going to dive in with one BTC question based on a recent tweet. You posted Brendan Lee's Streamanity video, the one about BTC chain death, where he spelled out a hypothetical scenario where we could witness the demise of BTC. And you said in your tweet, time to review this video. Hopefully, if you have BTC, you didn't split your UTXO so that you can watch this. Why did you post that video? And what's your take on the probability of a BTC chain death scenario?
Well, so there's lots of stuff in the chain. Well, first of all, thanks for what you were saying earlier, and you're one of my favorite people too. I like listening to your stuff, and so in chain death, there's lots of stuff in there. So I don't think there's we need to think that things will play out exactly like Brendan Lee says. It's really kind of like a journey through the imagination. And that's kind of what people in BTC are missing, is they're not thinking about how things can go wrong. Because if you think about, in order to think about how to fail, you need to use your imagination, because you need to think about scenarios that you haven't thought about yet. They don't want to do that, but it's really pretty easy to understand how BTC can fail. So in a high fee scenario, as fees goes up, higher and higher fractions of UTXOs on BTC become unspendable, because the fees are going to be bigger than the value that's in the UTXOs. So as fees go up, well, and also the lightning channels have to be closed out, because you need to stake some coins in the channel, and the channel gets closed if those coins don't cover the fees anymore. So so as fees go up, the system starts to fail, and and someone who had lots of Bitcoins and who wanted BTC to fail, or who had lots of BTC, I should say, who had lots of BTC and wanted BTC to fail, could easily create this scenario. They could create a scenario where BTC is useless for as long a time as they wanted, and eventually that would cause the price to crash, because ultimately these prices do have to get back to the real reasons that the coins are good. So people in BTC who think that they can just be day traders forever will eventually realize that they can't, and they need to dig into their savings and in order to sustain themselves. And they're going to realize that they have trouble doing that, and they're not going to value the coin as highly. Eventually, the value has to, the market value has to approach the real usefulness of a thing, and it can be off for a long time, but eventually the people who are living better will be able to afford more of what they want, and people who are doing stupid things will not be able to afford more of what they want. So the prices have to adjust. Anyway, I think that the chain death video is a good way of understanding a lot about what's wrong with BTC. And understanding it requires using your imagination to imagine a scenario that isn't current but could easily happen. Well, and this just has to do with security in general, right? Because if you're in order to design a crypto system that is functional, you need to think about every way that someone could try to break it and ensure that none of them work, which they're not doing on BTC.
Yeah, I found they seem to have no concept of the idea of failure.
Yeah.
Which is to me like a bad sign. Like, what would losing look like? And
right
there's no
side of
answer.
history, you know, we're on the right side of it's inevitable.
Speaking of failure, I love, Daniel, you had a sentence there that just tickled my funny bone. Usually people talk about imagination, like, you know, use your imagination, envision the future of what things could be and be creative. It's like if they're reading Rainbow. And you said something like, you know, use your imagination to figure out how you might fail.
Yeah.
Well, like, oh, that's the inspirational story.
Imagination.
Imagine failure.
Yes.
Well,
so every failure scenario.
But BTC they do have a solution. They have a solution to prevent failure. From what I can see on Reddit, it's that you post to Reddit and say, guys, stop being so selfish and trying to send transactions over Bitcoin. Okay. You're breaking it. Save it for only the most important people.
Yeah, they were organizing bread lines on our Bitcoin yesterday, which I thought was hilarious. Daniel, what do you think about? I have two questions, but what do you think about the likelihood that BTC would just raise its block size at some point if they realized that the problem was going to get this catastrophic? Or is it just like, is that just out of the picture because they've already gone so far and they've already proven how stupid they are?
Well, I think that anyone in BTC with any common sense left will realize that it's a lot easier to just leave and join BSV. And so, I mean, it's not impossible for them to sort of fix things. There's a lot, but what I think will really happen is the more sensible people will just leave. So what you'll end up with is just more craziness.
Yeah. Second question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Second question is, I've been sharing some stuff and just talking to these guys a bit about someone you've mentioned before on your videos, Mircea Popescu.
Oh.
So Mircea strikes me as kind of like a crazy person.
Yeah.
You know, like issuing death threats and like putting hits on people or something like that on his blog. Among other things, you know, like seeming to be the guy who was one of the really early guys who was radically against any attempt to raise the block size whatsoever. Can you explain this guy?
Sure. I'll tell you what I know about him. So Mircea Popescu, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, was the original Bitcoin cult leader. And the current BTC cult is like a lower class version of what he started.
No, I think you mean that literally, right?
Yeah.
You mean like like a
his,
historical derivative of it.
Yeah, no, but it's also like for the lower classes.
Right.
His cult was elitist.
Yeah.
And the people that he assembled around him all believed that they were going to be the elite of Bitcoin. So
He called himself like the Bitcoin Baron or something like that.
Yeah.
And he said that he had more money than anyone and that he could single-handedly stop anything, from happening in Bitcoin that he wanted to.
Yeah. Well, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
He in order for the money to accomplish anything, it has to be worthwhile for other people to acquire it. So you can't stop people from doing things that make the money more valuable.
Yeah.
Because if you try, you're just making your own money less valuable. But anyway, he started this MPEG exchange thing, and he said that it's always 30 Bitcoins to get an account, regardless of how expensive a Bitcoin becomes. And this was his way of ensuring that only the elite would be able to have an account on MPEG. And he also believed that Bitcoin as a whole was going to be the elite of the world. So only the highest top level people would be able to have Bitcoins at all, and Bitcoin was not for the plebeians. It was for the upper class.
And he was actually banned on Twitter because Andreas Antonopoulos said, "I hope that one day Bitcoin will be for like everybody, not just the upper class." And he said, "If that ever happens, I will kill you with my bare hands." and he got banned from Twitter.
Yeah. Well,
where did that guy go? Where is he now?
Well, I think he's still blogging. You should check out his blog. It's called Trilemma. I don't remember the exact URL, but you'll know it when you find it because it'll just be fucking crazy. And, his blog is really funny. There's some great stuff on there, but yeah, he's nuts.
One funny historical anecdote that I saw was from because he retreated after getting banned to these like devlogs or something like that, where he sort of held high court, and there was a funny chat between him and Seifstein Amos, where Seifstein's sort of being indoctrinated into Popescu's sort of ideology and asking Popescu to give him comments on his dissertation, even, which I thought was very very amusing, and explains a lot too, because Seifstein sort of acts like a lower tier version of Popescu.
Oh my God! I mean, remember my video about the floppy man?
That was the greatest. We use that phrase around the house, me and my kids. We talk about being a floppy man because of your video.
Well, great. Well, thanks. Well, yeah, and Seifstein is the epitome of the floppy man.
What is the floppy man?
So do you remember the cartoon version of Beauty and the Beast from the 90s?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, you remember how Gaston has his sidekick LeFou?
Yeah.
It's really funny because they have a completely different art style and animation style, and it's almost like they're in different movies, like they're characters from different movies, because Gaston is kind of a caricature. Well, that's anyway. He kind of is. He's sort of realistic, whereas LeFou is like a cartoony kind of character, and so Gaston is not proportioned like a normal person, but he appears to have like joints and muscles and bones and things, whereas LeFou is like just a rubbery kind of person. And they have this thing where Gaston picks up LeFou by the scruff of his neck, and he talks to him like he's like a pet or something. And this depicts their relationship. I love how the movie does it, because it depicts this the cult leader, cult member relationship in as a cartoon, like in their actions. So when Gaston wants to talk to LeFou just goes limp and just lets him pick him up, and Gaston says something to him, and then LeFou agrees with everything he says. And so LeFou is the floppy man.
I love it.
And that's what people in BTC are, who just go along with whatever the core developers say.
Daniel, my favorite thing that you said about that in that video was you showed LeFou getting thrown against the wall incredibly violently, and he's totally unaffected. And you said he no longer even feels pain because he so identifies with the person he looks up to that he doesn't have a sense of self sufficient to feel when he is actually being harmed. And then you showed when Jameson Lopp said he was willing to hold all of his Bitcoins until they go to zero.
Right, yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, and the first one is about this. So I don't know if you remember this, Daniel, but many years ago, probably 2013 or something, maybe 2014, you and it was you and Michael Goldstein, it might have been another person, I don't remember, you visited us in Atlanta, and we talked a little bit about Bitcoin and other stuff. And then this was before the falling out happened, whatever happened with some of those people who went on the core side. So when you're looking at the history of what has happened with the core cult and all the many rubber men that are in it, do you look at this as there was like at the high level, people were intellectually mistaken about the scalability of Bitcoin and the Lightning Network working, like they actually thought there were really good arguments, and they were just confused? Or do you look at this and say, this was something that was orchestrated, this was intentionally kind of a culty takeover that ended up working?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both going on, because I think that there's people with all kinds of different motivations. So not that I know him personally, but to me, Greg Maxwell seems like kind of a sociopath.
Yeah.
So someone who would want to destroy a community deliberately, and would want to understand the means of doing so. Whereas Safedine is someone who is like a classic narcissist, as are many people in BTC. And a narcissist is kind of like someone who will believe anything. A narcissist lacks self-insight and lacks self-reflection. And so cognitive biases are stronger with narcissists. So like, I think that Safedine really believes what he's saying, but I think that he's also someone who's much more easily manipulated. If you just make him feel like you're raising him up higher in a hierarchy,
you're stretching him out.
Yeah, right. For saying something, he'll believe it.
Yeah.
Great analysis.
But so I wonder then, because it seems like the Bitcoin community or BTC community especially was extremely hierarchical, and I was very surprised when some of the people, I think you said you called them former friends, they went pretty hardcore into this BTC world. I wonder if actually the person at the top or the people at the top is Greg Maxwell individually, and maybe this Popescu guy as well, at least early on. I really do think those two people might be the cause or the apex of the cult that we see. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see. I mean, it's hard to tell what's going on. I don't have a lot of insight into many of these people, but I will say, to me, Adam Back appears to really believe what he says, and I see him as another narcissistic kind of person.
Yeah, I didn't even see. People were sharing around this video of the whole adding back Satoshi thing. I honestly I couldn't bring myself to watch it because like there's a 0% chance to add it back to Satoshi.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm not Satoshi, but I swear there are 10,000 reasons that you should think I am. Just
So, about Popescu, I more than anyone, if you go back and you read Popescu, just go read his stuff and go read what he was saying in the dev logs. Everybody who is sort of a crazy person in core today sounds exactly like Popescu. It sounds like they're trying to imitate Popescu. Like look at Saifedean. I always thought Saifedean was sort of imitating Nassim Taleb, and to some extent he was, which is why it was funny when Taleb blocked him on Twitter publicly. But more importantly, you can see deliberate imitation of Popescu's style, Popescu's mannerisms, everything about him.
Yeah, that's why I said he's the original cult leader. Yeah.
No, it's crazy. It's like a trip through history.
Cult derives from him.
Yeah, a crazy person who was threatening to murder people online, and arguably, it looks like he was paying DDoSers to attack Bitcoin XT and all sorts of other crazy nonsense.
So I'm working on some Bitcoin stuff right now, and I happen to have the book right here.
Oh my God!
He thanks Popescu at the end of the book.
The foreword is written by Taleb.
Yeah, Taleb disowned him.
I had no idea.
Well, what's even funnier is Taleb says in the book that he says we can always recreate Bitcoin if Bitcoin fails. And Saifedean says that's like a horrible, you can never possibly ever, from the original BTC, you can never do anything that would possibly beat it. But Popescu is thanked at the end of the book in the credits as one of the influences on the book, which is, to me, just damning and proof of the idea that Popescu is behind a lot of this.
So I sometimes think of Derek as Bitcoin Jesus because he read Saifedean's book so that we didn't have to. You took it upon yourself. Daniel, I got to ask you, speaking of Bitcoin Jesus, I want to hear your take on what happened with Bitcoin Cash that caused the split with SV, and like, how do you read Bitcoin Cash and that faction of big block Bitcoin, and where did it go wrong in your opinion, since obviously you are placing your bet on SV?
Yeah, well, I see Bitcoin Cash as having orchestrated, well, I see Bitcoin as being the victim of a second takeover attempt that's similar to Bitcoin Core, but one that is more inept and more ridiculous. So Marx said history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. So to me, so Amaury, he's another narcissist. So he believes that, or I should say, he acts to put himself in control of everything, regardless of how much that hurts the system. And he's incapable of acting in a mode where he's not trying to gain control, and he manipulated people into rejecting people who didn't like that, similar to Core. And I don't think Amaury is the only one doing this kind of thing, but he kind of leapt into a good position for it, and so he has a lot of clout. And I think it's really, really crazy how people allow themselves to be treated like shit by him, who are clearly more competent and more intelligent.
Why did they?
I don't know.
Because when I go back and look at like those conversations that I wasn't privy to at the time, but some of the audio that leaked from that conference where everyone was yelling, and everybody knows about Craig Wright coming out and saying everybody is playing Limp Bizkit and all these inflammatory things. but then, so you just assume, oh, well, Craig must have offended everybody. But then you hear what Amaury's saying in there, and you're like, who would want to be like, yeah, I'm joining with this guy? Like, what made people do
Yeah,
that?
when I listened to that audio, I thought that is so crazy. Like, like I'll side with anybody but that guy.
Right?
Yeah, right.
It's like, yeah,
I mean, Amory can code. It's just, well, it's just another core dev thing. It's people have been tricked into thinking that the ability to program is something special, and it just isn't. So Amory is fine when he's a programmer, but when he's a benevolent dictator, then he's not very good.
It was a savvy move by him. I don't know how this exactly played out, but to be the one to immediately initiate the fork, because he basically gets to be in the forever big block Bitcoin lore by he's the one who heroically forked pre-SegWit. And that gave him so much standing and credibility, the fact that he got there first. And so everyone kind of looked to him, and the ABC was that first client. And it's kind of looking back, like it's too bad that someone else didn't beat him to it.
Yeah. I mean, he's horrible, but there's lots of horrible people in Bitcoin Cash too. So let's see, special mention for Amin Gun Suir. I
the Cornell
hope I'm
guy.
pronouncing his name correctly, but he's just like the classic like academic who believes that he knows everything and wants to have arguments all the time, but doesn't want to take risks on anything. He just wants to get control without without risking that he's losing money on his
so is he Ellsworth
investing in a
Toohey?
business. Yeah, he's Ellsworth Toohey.
So, Daniel, you said very refreshingly that success is not guaranteed for Bitcoin, or BSV in this case. You're making your bet on it. You believe there's a high probability, or higher than the other options, that it succeeds. But given that it's not guaranteed, what are the things that you would see as the biggest possible reasons? Use your imagination and imagine failure scenarios for BSV. What are the biggest potential points that would cause BSV to fail?
Well, I think that so to me, the main reason that Bitcoin would fail is people misunderstanding their own interests so badly that they ruin their opportunity in Bitcoin. So like right now, there's the potential that eventually the government will sort of jump in and try to shut everything down in Bitcoin, because there's been so much going on in Bitcoin that's just illegal that the government might not distinguish very well and might just try to ruin everything. But really, if people in government were thinking about their own interest, they would also realize that they can benefit a lot from Bitcoin. And so to me, like, Bitcoin becomes safer the more opportunity people have to just spend time thinking about their options. Because when they do, they'll find something good for themselves. But when they act rashly without thinking, there could be something that would just end Bitcoin. And I think that I think that that's sort of what I would be most concerned with, because I think that people in BSV right now basically understand the idea. So if there wasn't someone who might come in and just try to destroy everything, they would be able to make Bitcoin successful. And and but as time goes on, they're going to be able to create more options for people outside of Bitcoin to benefit from Bitcoin. And then it's going to be easier for other people to understand what their options are. And to me, that's what creates the success scenario for Bitcoin.
I've got a question for you. I want to ask you about Phil Wilson, by the way. I don't know if you've read his story, so hopefully we'll get around to that later. But I was hoping you could teach us a bit about the whole concept of Turing completeness and how it relates to Bitcoin, because I've tried to dig into the surface level of it, and it seems like actually the concept of Turing completeness itself is kind of a wonky concept, much less its application to Bitcoin, because it deals with infinite loops, infinite processes, and there's a whole issue there with infinity, which I'd be happy to talk about. But I'm not going
to. Love to talk about that.
Putting the stop sign there. Yeah.
I have also let Steve dive into Turing completeness so that he could then explain it to me.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So Turing completeness means that you have a system that can perform any computation that can be run by a Turing machine that halts. So a Turing machine has a specific definition that's kind of complicated. Well, let's step back a bit, okay? So back in the early days of computer science, when it wasn't any different from math, people had this idea that you could have a machine that replaces a mathematician, or I should say, some people were wondering about whether that would be possible, and they were thinking about whether all math could be formalized, and specifically, the question that was the big question was, given a mathematical statement, like the statement of a result of a proof, would a machine be able to say whether a proof exists and what the proof is? So you tell the machine, you know, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Does the machine come up with the Pythagorean theorem? What Gödel did was, in his proof of the incompleteness theorem, one of the steps that he took was to translate mathematical proof checking operations to arithmetic operations. So he devised a way of translating a proof checking operations into number operations, and that showed that proof checking could be done by a machine. And so then Turing decided to think about what could this proof checking machine do in general. So Gödel kind of came up with the idea of the proof checking machine, and Turing decided to think about what can it do other than proof checking. So just what's the general theory of everything that this machine can do? And so he came up with the computable functions. And well, first he designed the Turing machine, which is a very simple ideal computer that is capable of being this Gödel proof checking machine. And then he defined the computable functions. And these are the functions, the math functions that can be implemented by this machine. And so a math function, that means that there is an output for every input. And that's different from what computer scientists now call a function, because a computer function can run into an infinite loop and not return an output. So the computable functions are the total functions that can be implemented with a Turing machine. So later, other people came up with other ideal models of computation. So Church came up with the lambda calculus, I think, and well, Gödel came up with the recursive partial functions, and these together are the three most important early models of computing. And what the early computer scientists proved about these models is that they all compute the same functions. So this class of functions that Turing defined, called the computable functions, is also the class of functions that can be computed by the lambda calculus or the partial recursive functions. And this is now understood to be kind of a general result in computer science, which is that after your system achieves a certain relatively low level of complexity, then it can compute the computable functions. So you might have heard of Stephen Wolfram and Rule 131, which is a simple cellular automaton that he also proved is Turing complete. It's relatively easy to get the computable functions, but you can't go past the computable functions either.
Yeah, some might say humans can't either, but that's a different discussion.
Right. Yeah. So so a Turing complete machine is a machine that can implement any of the computable functions. So now, normally, so the reason that people were arguing with Craig Wright about this, well, there's a bunch of different points, but I think the main one is that the Bitcoin computer does not go into infinite loops because it doesn't have a looping construct. So if you want it to iterate, you have to specify a finite number of iterations, and it will only do that many. But that's still enough to implement the computable functions. You just have to give it as many iterations as it needs. Well, so Craig's point is you can compute any computable number. So you don't need to write out the computable function in a finite form. You can implement the function with as many steps as you want.
So correct me if I'm wrong. That doesn't seem like that remarkable a state for a computer to be in, is that it is Turing complete, or for some machine to be in to say that it is Turing complete. I mean, couldn't I, reprogram my Tamagotchi and essentially be able to compute any computable function with a long enough set of instructions?
Yes, there's an interesting website called Accidental Turing Completeness, and that website talks about the game Magic the Gathering as an example. You have a big enough deck of cards, or I should say, I don't quite remember how it works. You probably use those little magic tokens for it. because you can, if you had an infinite or I should say an unbounded number of them, then you can compute the computable functions with the game Magic the Gathering. So yeah, you get Turing completeness pretty easily just by accident.
So why would there be such controversy over this point, and so many words written by academics and others who say, oh my gosh, it's the most preposterous thing to claim that Bitcoin is Turing complete, where it doesn't actually seem like it's claiming very much at all. It's like saying it's a very basic computer.
Well, yeah, the Bitcoin script language, so, well, yeah, I mean, it's because people, it's easy to understand Turing completeness in terms of looping constructs,
Right.
with the which the Bitcoin script language doesn't have. But if you go back to the original definition, then Bitcoin is Turing complete according to that. But it's not what a professional programmer would normally think that Turing completeness means.
So would you say that you think their conceptual confusion is to believe that there are some computable functions which require loops in a programming language in order to compute?
It's just that when you have looping constructs, then it's easy to do all
right,
of the
but I'm saying
functions.
when they think, oh, it's not Turing complete, that would be the error that they're making, is thinking that it requires looping in their programming language?
Right. Yes, I think
Okay.
that's what's going on. But there was another argument that I had on Twitter with a shill. I'm pretty sure I was talking to a paid shill, but he was also saying that Bitcoin is not Turing complete because the miners do not run the computation. They merely check the computation that somebody else did when you create the transaction. But so conversely, this person was saying that Ethereum is Turing complete because the miners there are actually implementing the computation. But that's also incorrect, because there's also the concept of a non-deterministic computer, and what that means is that the computer accepts a computation, and it says this computation succeeds or it fails, and it can accept. It's possible for it to accept different computations that start from the same initial number, because there's just more things that are allowed, and that's why it's non-deterministic, because there are different branches that are allowed to occur from a given initial point. And so it makes more sense to think of Bitcoin as a non-deterministic Turing machine, because people can make they create a computation when they make a transaction, and then the Bitcoin miners accept or reject the computation, but they're not determined to produce a particular computation. They have options.
I remember talking to Ryan Charles something about this idea, and he was making the case that actually that's a benefit of Bitcoin, and others have said that too, is that the fact that you don't have the entirety of the miners executing the code per se, like gives you scaling benefits essentially.
Right, and well, Ethereum has gas, and Bitcoin doesn't need that, because miners can value the computations that they're given without having to run them, because it's roughly proportional to the length. And there are some operations that require a lot more, like hashing and signature checking. But basically, the size of the computation in the script that you give the miner is going to be proportional to the computational cost that they're going to that's going to be imposed on them by accepting it.
Mm.
So that's why we can say something like a Bitcoin transaction is a certain number of Satoshis per byte. But you can't do that in Ethereum because a computation that you give a miner can be very short.
Right.
But
Very complex.
it can actually be infinite. So you need to have gas, and you need to ensure that you have put enough gas in your transaction for it to run. And if you don't get through the whole thing before you run out of gas, then you don't get anything for it. And they need that because you can give the miner an infinite loop. So there has to be something that prevents the miner from going into infinity.
That difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin, the way you just described it, is the best breakdown of it I've heard. That was a really good, clear description. Guys, as we're trying to bring it around, we have a little bit of time left. Steve, you mentioned Phil Wilson. I would love to get your thoughts, Daniel, on Phil Wilson and his story.
Is that Scronty?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I just haven't been looking into these different Satoshi claims. To me, it is a distraction that will be interesting to me once I can relax, like once I have some leisure time. But for now, I'm working on making Bitcoin successful, and that's something that I have not made time for. And
Guys, I think he's calling us lazy for being so fascinated by the Craig Wright saga, or the Satoshi saga.
To me, Craig Wright is someone who I want as my ally, and whether he's Satoshi or not is that's not something that changes whether I want him as my ally. And I don't think that he's a perfect person, regardless of whether he's lying about being Satoshi. To me, he's someone whose ideas are so important that it would be really bad not to want to take advantage of them.
You said on a video that you saw Craig as a buck with big antlers.
Yes.
Can you go just briefly into like in what way is Craig costly signaling in your eyes?
Well, there's a tweet that he showed on one of his blog posts where he said that you should act like a fool in order to throw off your opponents. And I thought that was interesting because I did this video about him where I said he was acting like Groucho. And the joke of the movie Animal Crackers is that Groucho is much more intelligent than the other people in the movie. So he can act like a fool, but he also is in control of the situation. And I interpreted Craig's acting like a fool as a costly signal, as something that that you need to look past in order to see what he's really up to. And so I saw it as like a barrier of entry that is rejecting people who don't want to think about the situation enough. So I think he was thinking about what he was doing a little bit differently than how I interpreted it. But to me, he was acting like someone who was attracting lots of attention by acting a bit goofy, and but in a way that would reject people who had an idea of who they thought was good. And so I think that what we've seen in BSV is the people trying to destroy Bitcoin have been sort of misdirected. by this. And the people who kind of had a better idea about what's necessary for success were able to kind of see that what's happening in BSV is what's successful.
Yeah, I joked with the guys a while ago on Voxer that it felt like BSV took a lot of the best people, but then like a lot of crazy people too. Like,
Well,
did
yeah.
you think that costly signal seems to also attract like kind of like weirdos who seemed like the only time they've ever heard a thought on economics is because of Craig.
Yeah.
And like, so they try to very unsuccessfully parrot him and sound very stupid when they talk about Bitcoin. And yet the argument would be, I guess, that they're not actually economically relevant necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, well, isn't this weird how Bitcoin is supposed to be money contrasted with how much people in Bitcoin don't want to know what money is?
Yeah.
Because I've been trying to explain it ever since I got into Bitcoin, and very few people have wanted to understand what I was talking about.
But we want to talk about what Tone Vase tweeted about Craig Wright's wife's court case. Come on, Daniel. We don't want to know what money is.
Speaking of money, I went back to your article, which everybody who's listening should read, called "It's Not About the Technology, It's About the Money," which is just such an awesome article. I was reading it in response to this ABC dev had tweeted that the only serious competition to Bitcoin Cash is Nano and Dash, and that therefore Bitcoin Cash needs, some extra features in order to be competitive.
Oh
and
my God.
I thought that's crazy talk because he doesn't understand money.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe if we put a bird on it, people will want it more,
I mean, to me, like, the value of Bitcoin has always been the other Bitcoiners. And it's the design of Bitcoin, the system, that enables people to be valuable to one another. But without,
I think sorry, just to make a half joke, I think one of the worst parts of Bitcoin is the other Bitcoiners.
yeah. Well, yeah, the vast majority of Bitcoiners are not doing much to be a part of the value of Bitcoin. But I've found some good ones. Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is only going to work by Bitcoiners being valuable to each other. And that kind of means you have to accept whoever comes in, even if they're, a little bit rough around the edges or something, and you have to figure out what you can do to work with them. But I mean, lots of people who got into Bitcoin are just incapable of doing that. So most of what I mean, from like 2014 to 18 or so, the main thing that I've been doing is just trying to find anyone who is worth cooperating with. And that's kind of the reason that I did my Bitcoin Stuff show. It's kind of a shout into the darkness, because it's designed for to attract worthwhile people that I would like. And and fortunately that worked as far as I can tell. So now I know lots of people who I think are good. But yeah, for a while it was like anyone who even remotely understood Bitcoin was sort of isolated from everyone else because of the vast number of people who thought Bitcoin was about something else, something that has nothing to do with money.
The idea of the handicap principle, sorry, going back just a little bit about, Craig having big antlers. I think it's easy to think of the one aspect discussed in that book, or of the concept biologically of, costly signaling to attract a mate or as an attractive quality. But there's also the, and you might look at Craig Wright and be like, well, what is he doing to attract people with this kind of stuff? But there's also in the predator-prey relationship, when
he's
the
demonstrating opportunity cost. Sorry to interrupt, but
no.
If you can, I think Don Quixote has a costly signal because he's able to act crazy. Most people can't afford to.
But I think it also has a, the prey does some high energy expenditure, movement, and it signals to the predator that I've got a lot of energy, and apparently I'm confident enough that I think I have energy to spare. Now, they could be bluffing, and the predator could try to chase them down anyway, but the predator is going to say, I don't know if I want to try to call that bluff because my energy is scarce too. And so when Craig acts in those ways, I think it's also a signal. It's like at the poker table, the dude who just like goes all in on the first hand, and you're like, okay, you might be crazy, but you make me not want to go against you in battle because there's too much unpredictability and you're signaling something. And so like, it's an interesting way to make people not want to oppose him either.
One of my favorite things from Craig was his letter to Roger Ver, where he's like, "Welcome to bankruptcy."
Oh God, that email was so crazy.
I almost died laughing.
It was really funny. I mean, I wouldn't want to receive an email like that. But it was also like just zany. But
Derek's favorite is that Craig loves to threaten people with Thai prison, specifically Thai prison. It's not just prison; it's a Thai prison. That's
oh my God! Yeah, well, yeah, you don't want Thai prison. So my friend Andreas, not Antonopoulos, Andreas Brecken. Yes, he knows a little bit about Thai prison because he lives in Thailand. So
well, okay. I have to ask you. I'm so glad you brought up Andreas Brecken because this is a very random, obscure question. You may not even remember, but you and Andreas, right after the SV fork, you went together on some podcast, like Bitcoin Boys or something, and they were like pro SV, and Andreas, they pegged Andreas as pro Bitcoin Cash, but they heard him criticize the checkpointing or something like that had been done. And so they had him come on with you, and it appeared to me as if they thought they were getting Andreas and they were going to have this moment where he was like, we were wrong, Bitcoin Cash is wrong, and Bitcoin SV is right. And he would, and he just kept trolling them or like telling them, no, checkpoints are just a part of everything. How about you go do sideshift.ai.
Right.
I'm trying to show
let me tell you about that.
And you were just laughing the whole time, and it felt like you set these poor guys up to be embarrassed by Andreas.
Okay. Yeah. Let me explain what happened there. So this is another great trolling video that I did. And so what I thought was going to happen, so this was on the Bitcoin SV podcast, and it's an early episode with Captain Bitcoin, aka Shem, the Bitcoin Tramp, and Sir Toshi.
Yeah.
And they're really funny together. They're not doing the show together anymore, but they were really funny when they were doing it together. And so they talked a bit before about how much they hated Andreas Brecken, and Andreas invited me to go and visit him. So I thought maybe they would want him on the show so they can come to a better understanding. And what I thought was going to happen is that they would try to sell Andreas on Bitcoin SV and sort of like talk about what's good about it. But they didn't do that at all. They really just they try
they wanted an apology. They wanted atonement was the word they used.
They were trying to get him to atone for his sins because Andreas said some really incendiary things during the Bitcoin SV split, and so they hated him. And I don't know where they got the idea that he was going to atone for himself. To me, you would want people from outside of Bitcoin SV on the show to kind of explain the idea to them. But
I think they assumed that the fact that you suggested him meant that this was, well, then he must be ready to, because TK has gotten some of that same stuff when we do this show, and Steve and Derek and I have been more critical of SV than TK, or less completely bought in and a little more open to BCH in some of the episodes. And people have literally asked TK, like SV fans, like, TK, we love you, but how can you stand?
How can you
around those
associate with these people?
Like, they're genuinely confused, like, because they couldn't imagine themselves doing something like that.
Yeah. So what I thought is that I was giving them an opportunity to practice something that's very important, which is sort of being a salesman. But they didn't want to do that at all. And so Andreas just spent the whole time advertising his new business.
Well, I loved when he offered them, he told them he'll buy them a copy of Economics in One Lesson and send it to them. And he was just adamant about it. And they got so offended. And it was like right around the time they ended the call.
Well, they were like looking at you, Daniel, expecting you to come and save them from his onslaught. And you were just laughing, and they felt so betrayed or confused. It was amazing.
They were so mad. But I'm sorry, they totally blew it. They should have been ready with some explanation for why somebody who was initially opposed to BSV would want to join, but they didn't.
Hey guys, we got to bring this around. This has been incredible. Daniel, there's so many more things I want to talk to you about, and more have spun out of this, that we're going to have to do this again in the future, for sure. But any final thoughts you want to leave with us before we wrap it up?
I'm just really glad that you wanted to be on your show, and I see really good things for your show in the future, because I think that the team you've assembled is some of the smartest people that I know. So I think you're going to have some great discussions in the future. And so I'm pleased to be an honorary numpty this time, and I'll be happy to join again.
I really enjoyed this.
It's been great.
Yeah, the 5 numpties will have to reunite again.
And we can do a Steve and Daniel debate session over the question of merchants.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I think I had enough of that. Winning,
we need something else. And Calvin will try to be no promises that we'll try to be dignified. I'm not going to promise that at all. So anyway, had a lot of fun, guys. Until next time.